Dr. Shabir, we're looking at verse 434. And last time we discussed what classical commentators have said about this verse. This time we want to look at what modern interpretations are. So the verse, to recap, says that men can beat their wives. And the question is, what does that word beat in Arabic mean? How can it be interpreted, and how modern commentaries have looked at it?
Mm-hmm. So Quran 434, as you rightly said, has been interpreted by the classical commentators to mean that a man could beat his wife. But modern commentators now are moving in the direction away from that, because we recognize that, for a man to beat his wife, this is way out of place. We are living in an increasingly egalitarian world in which we recognize, the equality of people in general and the equality of the sexes in particular. So to say that a man could beat his wife is very much out of place in our modern world. Mm-hmm. This is widely recognized among Muslims and non-Muslims, and this is why we see that many Muslims are going back to this verse and trying to reach a different interpretation. Otherwise, there'd be no need. We have the classical interpreters. There are very many. They are very much schooled in the art of classical interpretation. They're very much in tune with the Arabic language and its meanings and so on. We cannot top them in that.
Mm-hmm. Of course, we can't just, when we look at the verse, we can't just say, this is unacceptable according to modern standards. So the verse can't say that.
That's right.
We have to try and grapple with the verse to try and understand what could it possibly be saying. Is this really what God intends, or are we misunderstanding it in some way?
Yes, you're right. So modern commentators have, tried to deal with this in different ways. They try to grapple with it. One commentator said, well, we just have to say no to the verse.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yes. So, but others have said, no, we can look at the meaning again. What the classical commentators said is not necessarily the last word on this. We can look again at the precise meaning of the words. And the one word they picked out in particular, the most problematic word in that, at least in the translation, was the one which says, and beat them. Mm-hmm. So there have been many attempts to look at that word again. And indeed, this word has a wide variety of meanings. So strike could be one of the meanings, like hit. But just as in English, the word strike could have many meanings, the word daraba in Arabic, which means literally he hit, could have a number of meanings as well. Mm-hmm. So by way of comparison, we can think of the word strike in English. You can strike up a conversation, you can strike a coin, you can go on strike. And so on. So, there's so many different meanings of the word strike, in addition to just the simple meaning of beat somebody. Mm-hmm. So when we look at the Arabic word daraba as well, it could mean coin a similitude, daraba masalan, in the Quran. It could mean travel, daraba fil ard, traveling in the earth, and so on. So many commentators now coming on the scene say, well, it doesn't have to have the meaning of hit. It could mean to move away. So if we take it systematically, we can say, all right, the Quran gives the three-step approach to the husband. If you have a recalcitrant wife, how do you reform her? Well, first is to give her good advice. That's the Arabic term, fa'iduhun. And then if she's not listening to the advice, then you can move away from her bed. And that's wahjuruhunna fil madaji'. And then the last stage would be for you to move away from her in a bigger way. So this is the wadribuhun. Mm-hmm. This is almost like wahjuruhunna, but this is a greater separation from her. And that seems to make sense. And this has been widely argued, for example, by Abdul Hamid Abu Sulayman in a paper that he presented, and that has been published in a little booklet with a foreword by Kathy Bullock. This has been widely circulated, and the idea itself has taken root. Many commentators now seem to follow that. Safi Kaskas, in his translation of the Quran, which is widely received, takes this view, and Laleh Bakhtiar, a female translator of the Quran, has widely publicized this view as well as one of the reasons behind her producing a fresh translation. So this has become a widely received interpretation. This is backed up also by their reference to the Prophet, peace be upon him's own example. They say the Prophet, peace be upon him, never beat anyone, whether wife or anyone else. And when he fell into difficulties with his wives, he did not beat them, but rather he moved away from them. It is known that on one occasion in particular, he had separated himself from his wives for a month. So they say this is the prophetic example, and that is the best way of explaining this verse. But that's only one way of dealing with this verse.
Mm-hmm. I believe Laleh Bakhtiar also refers to another verse which talks about divorce, and it says if you're going to divorce your wife, you should treat them kindly, right? You shouldn't abuse them in any way. And so she says, well, even if you're in this situation of divorcing and you're still supposed to treat them kindly, then what about if you have this sort of massive disagreement in the marriage, right? Why would you beat your wife in that situation? Yeah,
it's a good argument. And we can add to this that, Khaled Abou El Fadl, said that if you give the man the permission to beat his wife in such a blanket and general way, how do you control that? If you're leaving the judgment and execution in the hands of the husband, so the husband will be judge, jury, and executor over his wife, and the man in the meantime could be a scoundrel. And how can you give him that kind of responsibility? So many have reacted to this verse, and they've come up with a variety of interpretations. Some of the interpretations are interesting, perhaps even amusing. We mentioned when we discussed the classical commentators how At-Tabari, despite being one of the greatest commentators on the Quran in our history, he had a very obscure meaning that came to be rejected by the later commentators. Now, we come to Ahmed Ali, a modern translator of the Quran, and he gives an entirely different meaning from what Tabari gave. He said that when we come to this verb daraba, this verb can mean intimacy, because if we say in Arabic darba al-jamalu an-naqa, the male camel struck the female camel, it means that he had intimate relations with her. So he mated with her, to use a term that is more befitting the animal world. So in the human context, this verb could mean have intimate relations with your wife. So the way Ahmed Ali would put it is that the three-step approach is: first you advise your wife to bring her back to her senses, and then if she is still recalcitrant, then you do not molest her. This is the moving away from her. Like you just keep your distance a bit so as not to provoke her more or be a further nuisance to her. Just give her space. And then the third step would be to now move back to her and have intimacy with her when she is ready. So this is like a supreme example of, seeing things from the woman's point of view and giving due importance to the woman and her feelings and so on. But then the question is this what was intended in the verse? And if so much was intended in the verse, how would it have been conveyed at the time when it was actually conveyed like this? Because of course this is a very modern sensitivity brought to the interpretation of the verse. So nonetheless, this is an interpretation that is out there. It's there in a published English translation together with the Arabic of the Quran. And if time permits, I'll mention even another very attempt to deal with this, which is interesting in its own way. And in one way, it has actually helped me to arrive at my own interpretation of this passage. In fact, looking at all of these, the classical commentators in general, and I've read many of the classical commentators on this in the Arabic, and looking at many modern commentators, all of this has informed me to come up with my own particular approach to this. But if you have time, I'll mention one more approach.
Yes.
So this approach was mentioned by Riffat Hassan in a book entitled Feminism and the World's Religions, edited by Catherine Young, I believe is the one of the editors at least. So Riffat Hassan looks at this, and she looks at many issues in the Quran and classical Islamic interpretations that could be problematic for women at this in modern times, and she looks at ways in which we can overcome the problems. So looking at this verse in particular, Quran Surah 4, verse number 34, she says, well, the salihat, the righteous women that are mentioned here, should be understood in a particular way. She says that salihah means basically in Arabic something that's wholesome or good or healthy or something like this. So as in a religious context, a salih is a righteous person. Mm-hmm. But she says, no, let's not think of the meaning that way. Let's think of salahiyat, which means suitability, or like in the context of the woman, the suitable women are the women who are suitable for childbearing. So these are, they're good for childbearing. So the women who are good for childbearing should be obedient, and they should conform to the society's needs to produce children. But if they are recalcitrants, now she's understanding the recalcitrants or Arabic nushooz in a different way now. If her recalcitrance would be that she's refusing to bear children, but not an individual. That's not a problem if an individual does this. But if all women altogether decide to rebel against the state by saying, we refuse to have children, well, then what will happen is that the ummah of the Muslims will come to nothing. There will be no reproduction, and the ummah cannot continue. So this will be a huge problem. So to deal with this huge problem, this is where the daraba comes in. So she's understanding the word daraba, which we have said has the simple meaning to hit, but can have many different meanings. She's understanding it here now to mean imprisonment. So now the women will be imprisoned because they are rebellious against the state. In fact, one can even say rebellious against humanity because they are not doing their simple duty that will ensure the continuance of the human race, or within the purview of the Muslim Ummah, they are not going to ensure or rather what they're doing now will certainly lead to the cessation of the Muslim nation as a populace.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Shabir, have these individuals talked about, you mentioned the women, right? So have they talked a little bit about what nushooz is? Because I understand that some commentators have said that, women were engaging in sexual impropriety, that this verse is referring to women who were engaging in sexual impropriety in some way. And so these actions are pretty drastic as a result. So the man is allowed to take these actions because it's gotten to a very extreme state. It's not just like her being disobedient, like not wanting to cook one day or something like this.
Yeah, so the term nushooz, which sounds almost like new shoes, so the term nushooz in Arabic it has been explained in the classical commentators by the classical commentators to have a variety of meanings, but the modern commentators will try to say that it must mean something drastic or severe. It cannot be something minor, as the classical commentators were listing very minor things. But it must be something like, really worthy of a strong reproach. Mm-hmm. So, for example, sexual impropriety. And indeed, this would be backed up by some narratives, like from some hadith, for example, would mention that one of the rights of the husband is that the wife should not bring a stranger onto his bed. Mm-hmm. Which is another way of saying, she should not be sleeping around. So if she does that, then of course she according to the hadith, she deserves this kind of beating. But is that beating that does not, the hadith is very clear, darban ghayra mubarrih. It is a beating that does not cause injury. So it is to be therefore a light one. We're not saying that this is right. We're just explaining the classical tradition and how modern interpreters have tried to deal with that. But if we go back to the classical commentators, we will see that they went beyond this idea of sexual impropriety. Some of them, for example, Al-Razi mentions that, let's say the man observes that his wife is no longer responding to his touch the way she used to. So that is something wrong in the marriage, and he should then start taking the necessary steps. But probably he does not mean that he should go to the last step of beating her. Maybe he means initiate the first step, which is the advice, have a conversation with her, which is a reasonable thing. If either wife or husband realizes that the other party is not responding with love and affection that as they used to, there's a sudden change in behavior, or even if it's gradual change of behavior, but one can observe that over time this has happened, then one should naturally have a good conversation with the spouse. It reminds me of a cartoon which showed that, Superman is reading his comics, and he's reading his newspaper, and he's absorbed in reading his newspaper, and apparently he's an old version of Superman. So his wife says to him from a distance, "Honey, how is it that you no longer look at me with those X-ray visions, with your X-ray vision as you used to at one time?" So, even Superman's wife may have to have a talk with Superman about this. But we should also have talks with our spouses if we know this kind of change in behavior. So that's the first step about having a talk. But the classical commentators on the Quran saw the disobedience of the wife as being something of major importance, because when they talked about nushooz, they linked the use of the word nushooz with its mention in other places in the Quran, and they found that nushooz basically means something rising above. So a verse of the Quran says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَكُمُ انشُزُوا فَانشُزُوا. When it is said to you, like you're in a gathering and it's said to you, rise up, then you should rise up. يَرْفَعِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ دَرَجَاتٍ. Then Allah will raise those among you who have been given knowledge, and so on.
So it's sort of referred to as, it's arrogance, I guess.
Arrogance, or just simply haughtiness. Even from their point of view, the husband is supposed to be over the wife. So if the wife is trying to rise above, like in terms of like authority within the relationship, then this is a problem. So anything that the wife does that shows that she considers herself to be of more importance or of authority over the husband, she doesn't have to listen to the husband, then this, according to the classical commentators, qualified as nushooz in a very basic way.
So Dr. Shabir, to sum up, what is your understanding, or how would you judge these modern interpretations of this verse?
Well, I would say that all of these contribute something to my own thoughts, but I find these interpretations to be somewhat stretched, or in some way they do not convince me. Let me explain why. So as for Riffat Hassan's explanation about imprisoning the women if they all en masse decide to rebel against the state and refuse to bear children, this seems to be very remote from the cultural context in which the Quran was first revealed. Like, it's unimaginable that women 1400 years ago would have even, conceived it as a possibility. Even now, even with the rise of modern feminism and so on, and some women thinking, why should we bear children? This is, a minority among women. It's not going to be a majority situation anytime soon. So why would the Quran 1400 years ago be prescribing something that's not, for a situation that's not going to happen? As for for Ahmed Ali's interpretation, I've already indicated that this seems to be like a very modern reading, which modern does not necessarily mean wrong, but it does not seem to fit the social context again of, if the Quran is trying to convey that modern message, it's hard to see how it would have been put in this language the way it is in the Quran, because obviously everybody missed it, and not for any fault of their we can say it because of their cultural milieu and so on. But if the Quran wanted to give this meaning, which shows that you become intimate with the wife, the term daraba hardly would have been the term to use, it seems. It does not give you that immediate impression. And as for the idea that it means move away, so for example, if we take the verb daraba fil ard, moving in the earth, which means to travel, the verb is followed by a preposition, daraba fi, to travel in. But the word daraba by itself seems to require an object. And it means that it hits something else, or someone hits something. So it seems that that too is not a convincing argument in my humble opinion. It's not convincing to me anyway. I know it's convincing to many, and I respect the many people who find that convincing. But I find that there is a need to arrive at a better explanation, and God willing, and with your patience, I'll try to explain that in the next segment.
Okay, Dr. Shabir, let's leave that for another segment.
Sure.
If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe, and please donate to support our work at QuranSpeaks.com.